If you've lived in Louisiana long enough, you've probably been closer to ghost towns than you realize. Across this state are places where entire communities once lived, and today many of them are completely gone. These are 13 ghost towns in Louisiana, and number 1 will blow your mind. Number 13. Isle Dernier, Louisiana. Along the Louisiana coast, there used to be a barrier island where wealthy families would spend their summers, arriving by steamboat from New Orleans to stay for weeks at a time, drawn by the white sand beaches, the gambling halls, and a large hotel with a ballroom that made it one of the most fashionable resorts in the South. The place was called Ile Dernière. In August of 1856, as a Category 4 hurricane began moving toward the island, the owners of that hotel opened the ballroom and hired a fiddler to keep the guests calm. And while the storm was already approaching and the water was rising outside, the guests stayed inside and danced. Within minutes of the storm surge hitting, the entire island was underwater and every building on it was gone. Of the roughly 400 people on the island, 198 were killed. Rescue teams did not arrive for 5 days, and the survivors who remained scattered across the marsh were forced to survive on crawfish and rainwater. When boats finally reached the island, not all of them came to help, as pirates arrived first and moved through what was left, looting the dead. The hurricane split the island in two, and it was never rebuilt. Today, the area is a wildlife refuge, and the only sign that a resort ever existed there is a historical marker in a town 45 miles away, because there is no longer any land left at the original site to place it. Number 12. Ruddock, Louisiana. There is still an exit sign for Ruddock on Interstate 55. If you take that exit, you will find nothing. No buildings, no roads, no foundations, just swamp, rotting pilings, and the sound of water where a town used to be. Ruddock was a cypress lumber town built entirely on wooden platforms above the swamp. In its prime, it had a railroad depot, a hotel, a school, and its own newspaper. Everything connected by walkways above the water, with the railroad as the only link to the outside world. On September 29, 1915, a Category 4 hurricane swept through. Residents ran to the depot for shelter. The depot collapsed on top of them. 58 people died. The survivors clung to cypress trees and whatever else was still floating in the dark. The railroad was rebuilt, but the town was not. The exit sign on Interstate 55 has pointed toward Ruddock since the highway was built, still pointing to a place that has not existed for over 100 years. Number 11, Balize, Louisiana. Every single ship that entered or left the port of New Orleans, every ship carrying cotton, sugar, timber, soldiers, and immigrants for over 160 years had to pass through this town first. Balize was founded in 1699 at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Its name meant sea mark in French, and that is exactly what it was. River pilots lived there, boarded every incoming ship, and guided it through the shifting sandbars and dangerous currents of the Delta. Without Balize, the port of New Orleans could not function. The French built a 62-foot wooden tower there to help sailors find the river mouth at sea. The problem was that the mouth of the Mississippi is one of the most hurricane-prone stretches of coastline in America. Balize was hit so many times and so severely that its history is essentially a list of catastrophes: destroyed in 1740, rebuilt, destroyed again, rebuilt again. The pilots could never leave because the ships still needed guiding. Then in August of 1860, 2 hurricanes struck in the same month. The first tore it apart, and the second finished it. A new settlement was built 5 miles upriver, and 5 years later, a third hurricane destroyed the last physical traces of Balize entirely. By the early 1900s, all that marked the original site was a single rusted iron tomb. The oldest French settlement in Louisiana is now at the bottom of the Gulf of America. Number 10, Waterloo, Louisiana. Along the Mississippi River, there was once a busy port town where cotton and sugar moved through daily, and families built their lives around the rhythm of the water. The place was called Waterloo. Founded in 1820, it grew into one of the most active towns in the area, with a waterfront that kept the entire community alive. Then, in 1884, the river rose and the flood tore through the town, destroying most of what stood there and forcing the people who lived there to try and rebuild. But before they could recover, arsonists began setting fires across what remained, burning down the structures that had survived the flood and leaving almost nothing behind. After that, the residents gave up and moved to nearby new roads, leaving the town behind for good. Today, there is nothing there that tells you a town ever existed. The land was later developed into subdivisions, and people now live on top of it without knowing what came before. But every so often, when someone digs into the ground, pieces of the old town still surface: bricks, iron hardware, fragments of buildings that once stood there, and most of the people living there today have no idea what's buried beneath their homes. Number 9. Bayou Chene, Louisiana. Deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, there was once a community that could only be reached by boat, where the bayou provided everything people needed and the outside world barely existed. The place was called Bayou Chene. Settled in the 1830s among cypress trees and slow-moving water, it grew into a self-sufficient community with a church, a school, and a post office, where generations of families lived in homes built on stilts and moved through daily life entirely by boat. In 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood sent water far beyond the riverbanks and submerged the entire town for weeks, forcing families to move to the second floors of their homes, and when those went under, to build platforms in their attics and wait above the waterline. They didn't leave. When the water finally receded, they came back down and rebuilt, just as they always had. But what ended Bayou Chene wasn't a natural flood. In the years that followed, large-scale flood control projects redirected water into the basin, causing repeated flooding that made it harder to stay each year. By the early 1950s, the school and post office had closed, and soon after, the last residents left for good. Today, Bayou Chene lies buried beneath roughly 12 feet of silt, a community that survived decades of natural flooding but couldn't survive the changes meant to control it. Number 8. Peason Ridge, Louisiana. In 1941, the United States Army knocked on the doors of 25 families in the rural hill country of central Louisiana and told them they had to leave. Their land was needed for a military training ground. The Army never gave the land back. Soldiers still train at Peason Ridge today. The forests where those families farmed and built churches now serve as a backdrop for military exercises. Along the road, small weather-beaten display cases hold photographs of the people who used to live there. Smiling couples, children on porches, an elderly veteran, a young man with his fists raised, and brief notes about the community they formed before the war took it away. During certain times of year, when the military opens access, visitors can still find the faint outlines of roads that used to connect neighbors, old grave plots, and the foundations of churches, all sitting untouched inside a military perimeter that most people do not know exists. The people who were forced off that land are mostly gone now. Their photographs are in a weathered display case on the side of a military highway, and that is the only memorial they have. Number 7. Frenier, Louisiana. Most people know this town from the voodoo story. A woman named Julia Brown was the community healer, and when she felt taken for granted, she started sitting on her porch singing the same song over and over. "One day I'm gonna die and take the whole town with me." She died on September 29, 1915. The whole town came to her funeral. While they were burying her, a Category 4 hurricane arrived. 25 people sheltering in the railroad depot died when the building collapsed, and the town was destroyed. What almost nobody knows is that the voodoo priestess version of this story, the curses, the dark powers, the deliberately killed town, was invented by a local historian for a television production in 2015. He has since publicly apologized and admitted he made it up. Julia Brown was not a voodoo priestess. She was a landowner, a healer, and a mother who felt overlooked by the people she had spent her life caring for. She really did sing that song, and the hurricane really did arrive on the day of her funeral. The cemetery is still there, sinking at the edge of the swamp, and airboat tours still stop nearby to tell the voodoo version, the real story of a woman who predicted her own death and was right about what would follow, is the one most people never hear. Number 6. Laurel Valley, Louisiana. Most ghost towns leave ruins. This one left the whole thing standing, and almost nobody knows it exists. 60 of the original cypress cabins are still there, lining the old plantation roads of what was once one of the largest sugar operations in Louisiana. The complex ran on the labor of over 130 enslaved people at its peak and kept producing until 1926, when the sugar mill went quiet for the last time. The mill machinery is still inside, exactly as it was left the last day it ran. The railroad tracks that once carried millions of pounds of sugar cane from the fields are rusting under weeds, and those 60 cabins, small, low, built by people who did not choose to be there, are still standing in rows along roads that have not changed in 200 years. There are no crowds and no gift shop. You can walk between those cabins in near total silence, and every one of them was built by someone who had no choice in the matter, built it to last, and it did. If this kind of story is what you watch this channel for, subscribe. We go deeper every single week. Number 5. Taft, Louisiana. In 1963, a Catholic church was physically picked up and moved to another town, and the cemetery it left behind tells you everything you need to know about what happened to Taft. Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary had stood at the center of this community since 1887. Families had lived within a few miles of it for generations, farming the land, using the ferry crossing on the river, building the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Then Shell Oil moved into the area and the industrial expansion spread. The farms were bought out or forced out one by one. When the church was relocated to the town of Hahnville, the graves stayed behind. That cemetery is still there today, surrounded on 3 sides by chemical plant facilities, with a handful of old graves and nothing else for miles. The families of people buried there have to drive through a chemical corridor just to visit them. The 2000 census recorded 0 residents in Taft, 700 people and every trace of their community gone completely, and almost nobody outside that area knows it ever existed. Number 4. Cheniere Caminada, Louisiana. On the morning of October 1st, 1893, every bird on the Louisiana coast suddenly left. Seagulls, pelicans, even the large ocean birds that never came inland, all of them flying away from the Gulf at once. The cattle in the fields started moving inland too. Some of the fishermen noticed, and a few people started to worry, but the weather forecast had said fair skies, and inside the church a wedding was underway. People dressed in their best clothes, the church full. That night, a 16-foot wall of water arrived in the dark. Cheniere Caminada was a fishing village of about 1,500 people. French-speaking Creoles, Italian immigrants, Acadians, and Chinese and Croatian fishermen who had built lives on the Louisiana coast. It was the largest supplier of fresh oysters and seafood to the restaurants of New Orleans, and the community had just finished their new schoolhouse and just received their own post office. When the storm was over, 779 of the 1,471 residents were dead, more than half the entire population, in a single night. The cemetery flooded and split open graves just as new ones needed to be dug. The church bell rang through the entire storm and was still ringing the next morning, long after the church itself was gone. That bell survived and is still in use today at a church on the neighboring island, the same bell that rang through the worst night in Louisiana history. Kate Chopin was summering nearby when it happened. The sea in everything she wrote after 1893 is never just beautiful, it is also something that takes. Number 3. Bayou Corne, Louisiana. In the summer of 2012, residents of this small bayou community began noticing things that made no sense. The ground was trembling, bubbles were rising from the water, and a smell of crude oil hung in the air. They contacted authorities. The company operating a massive underground salt mine directly beneath the town, Texas Brine, told state officials that a sinkhole was highly unlikely. On August 3, 2012, the ground opened up. A section of swampland the size of a city block dropped into a void hundreds of feet deep. 100-foot cypress trees were swallowed whole in seconds, disappearing straight down as if something beneath the earth was pulling them from below. The governor of Louisiana ordered all 350 residents to evacuate immediately. A court later found that Texas Brine had known about the instability in that mine wall since at least 1976 and had put economic concerns ahead of the safety of every person living above it for nearly 40 years. By 2024, the sinkhole had reached 37 acres and 750 feet deep, and it is still not done expanding. Most of the 350 residents accepted buyouts that nearly all of them said were far below what they had lost. A retired teacher who was flown over it shortly after it appeared said, "When I passed over it, I thought I caught a glimpse of hell on earth." Some of them are still there, living next to a hole in the ground that has been growing for over a decade and shows no sign of stopping. Number 2. Reveille Town, Louisiana. Reveille Town was founded in the 1870s by people who had just been freed from slavery. They built a church and a community on the west bank of the Mississippi River, land they owned themselves, a real town built with their own hands. For generations it held together, small and quiet, and theirs. Then a chemical company called Georgia Gulf built a plant right next to it. The pollution came gradually: groundwater contamination, worsening air quality, the slow encroachment of industrial infrastructure on every side. By the late 1980s, it was impossible to pretend the town was livable anymore, and Georgia Gulf bought the residents out and relocated them. What they did not buy was the cemetery. The graves of the people who had founded Reveille Town stayed behind. The chemical company eventually took ownership of the cemetery, and today it sits inside the industrial facility surrounded by the plant. The descendants of the people buried there have had to fight in court for the right to visit the graves of their own family. Reveille Town is gone, Georgia Gulf is still there, and the cemetery is theirs. Number 1. Morrisonville, Louisiana. Morrisonville was there before any of it. Before the 85 miles of chemical plants between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that Louisiana calls Cancer Alley. Before the refineries, the pipelines, the industrial corridor that now lines both sides of the river, Morrisonville was already there, a community founded in the 1870s by people freed from a nearby plantation, built around the Nazarene Baptist Church, with a school, fields, and the kind of close-knit life that holds for generations. Then Dow Chemical built a factory next door in 1958. At first, there was a green space between the factory and the town. Then Dow expanded and expanded again. By the 1980s, the wells in Morrisonville were contaminated. Special radios were installed in residents' homes to warn them of chemical emergencies at the plant. The people of Morrisonville were living inside Dow's safety zone. They just had not been told yet. In 1989, Dow announced it was buying every home and every piece of land in Morrisonville. The announcement came just before a federal government report on the factory's pollution was due to be released. Residents who refused to sell were told plainly that their property would be worthless if they stayed. By 1993, the town was empty. Dow relocated the residents to new housing developments they named Morrisonville Estates and Morrisonville Acres, using the town's name on the replacements. Many residents died before they were able to settle in. Today, only the cemetery of the Nazarene Baptist Church remains, surrounded on 3 sides by Dow chemical facilities. The company even built a small, open-sided wooden shelter next to the graves so that families can visit. Morrisonville was not the first freed slave community in Louisiana erased this way. It was the 4th. Reveille Town and Sunrise came before it. The diamond community of Norco came after. 5 communities in all, built by people who survived slavery and built something worth keeping, gone, one by one, along the same stretch of river. The historical marker for Morrisonville was erected in 2004 by the Dow Chemical Company. Drop a comment and tell me what town you live in so we can cover it next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.